Hi, this is a redo of the talk that I gave on Sunday for the retreat group for the team because the recording ran out. So here it is. It won't be quite the same. When we're giving a retreat, we should be a little bit like doctors that they're saying is first, do no harm. And so it's really important that we grow and develop ourselves in a way that we can do these retreats, but not add to somebody's problem. They should come away from the retreat better and hopefully feeling stronger and more sure. But at the very least, we want to be careful we don't do something we shouldn't do. So to do that, we have to examine ourselves and see, what we're like and what kind of problems we have, what kind of strengths we have, and try to work on ourselves and be the best servants we can. Okay, so that's why I guess I've been asked to come and do something on the 7 deadly sins. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give you some ideas of framework, a little bit around them, and then really focus on 3. So then you can kind of fill in for the other ones. And I'll show you how they're categorized. There's a couple of different ways that's done. I don't know how to get you the handout, but somehow we'll do that. There was a handout given out. Maybe I'll put that online for you. So look for a link. I'll put the link right here. This is where you can go for the handout. High tech. All right, let's take a look at what we've got here. So first, I've got a quote from the Catechism, paragraphs 1868, 1869. I'm just going to paraphrase it a little bit here. Sin is a personal act, but we have a responsibility for the sins committed by others when we cooperate in them. How do we cooperate in somebody else's sin? Well, by participating directly, of course, and voluntarily. Also by ordering, advising, praising, or approving them. This is actually really important. Sometimes we talk about celebrities and make a big deal out of people that are really not appropriate role models for the people making the retreat or for us. And we get so caught up in the celebrity, we become like the rest of the world and forget that God doesn't see things the way that maybe the public does. So we need to be more careful about that. Okay. And also by not disclosing or hindering them when we have an obligation to do so. Now we have to be careful that we don't make this an occasion for being busybodies either. It isn't saying that if you know that somebody's doing something wrong, in Ezekiel, it says, if you see it, you have to say something. It doesn't mean you have to keep harping on it, because at some point all we can do is love people. Sin makes men accomplices of one another. And causes concupiscence, the tendency to sin, violence, and injustice to reign among them. This is important. Sins give rise to social situations and institutions that are contrary to the divine goodness. It's for more than a century, maybe more. Wherever there's an American naval base, there ends up being brothels growing up around it. If there was no demand, there'd be no supply. By not all, but by some people not controlling themselves, they actually create a market for something that's wrong. And then people go and do that. They end up, in a sense, inviting other people to sin and creating a system that's wrong. It's systemic sin, institutions and social situations. And then that causes more people to do wrong. It makes it appear more acceptable, and it just gets worse and worse. And we've seen this all over the place. I mean, with prostitution, with abortion, with any number of other things. Just selling extremely expensive cars. If there was no demand, they really don't go any faster, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take a look at the list of the sins there. By the way, there's percentages on the handout, and when you see that percentage, it's the number of, I took a survey, it's the people that, how many people think that that is the most serious sin. So it kind of gives you a little ranking. Not surprisingly, they think lust is the worst. Pride falls in there somewhere. And greed is actually, people rank that the lowest. I just think that's amazing. There was that movie with Michael Douglas in it where he says, greed is good. And so apparently a lot of people, 95% of the people believe that. I don't know. All right. First on our list is pride. And the opposing virtue of humility. Well, that one's a no-brainer. Greed or avarice, the treatment for that, if you will, is generosity. Envy, the solution is love. Wrath or anger, of course, the opposite is kindness. These are the things that we would do to combat it or focus on. Lust, self-control. There's a lot to lust, though, that we're not going to talk about here, but I'll touch on it in a way. Gluttony is, strangely enough, faith and temperance. Not just temperance, but faith and temperance. Sloth, of course, then zeal. So the traditional grouping of the 7 deadly sins, or one of the groupings that's there, is the idea of spiritual sins, physical sins, but sloth actually falls in the center. It falls where it's both. We can be lazy or hesitate to act on physical matters in doing work, physical work, doing work at work that may not be physical, may be mental work, but it's still within the context of the body. But also we can be lazy spiritually. We can be lazy with facts. We can be lazy with intellect. We maybe don't reason things through. We just go with what other people say. We just don't try. People that fail in school, sometimes it's because they're not trying hard, and they might not be trying hard in terms of hitting the books and everything that way, but they may not be trying hard spiritually, where they're just not oriented toward growth, not oriented toward making the most of what God gave them. So sloth is kind of in the middle, and it's really a part of both worlds. Something that's important to think about with this is the end of this life somewhat, or maybe completely, ends the sins that are purely physical sins. But the ones that are spiritual can go forever. And of course, the one that we are most familiar with as a spiritual sin is pride, and that's the downfall of the devil. So Lucifer, fell through pride. This is what we're taught. And I think that's kind of interesting. It's a spiritual sin. Lucifer couldn't be greedy. He couldn't really be gluttonous. He apparently wasn't very lazy. I don't know. Anyway, these are not absolute divisions. They're not something that everybody has to believe or anything like that. But you can think about it and see if that helps. I do want to talk just a little bit more about lust before moving on to the 3 that I'm going to cover in some detail. Eros is the Greek word for love, and we usually associate that with eroticism, with sexual expressions. However, in the Greek, as I understand it, it also can mean looking at something beautiful and enjoying it, which of course is not inherently sinful. But it is an interesting thing that love of beauty is eros. We love it because it's beautiful. We love it because it's pleasing. You can kind of see where they have that something in common. One more note before we move on into the 3 is that these are called the 7 deadly sins, or 7 capital sins. But it doesn't mean that every feeling like this is automatically sin. It doesn't mean that if we feel some greed, we just wish we had a little more, if we're a little bit envious or something, it doesn't automatically make it sin. And laziness in particular can become habit. So it's something to think about, because some of these things people can be kind of sensitive about it and say, oh, well, you're saying it's a sin to feel sad, because you're going to see that that's related to sloth. But no, it's not that the sin is in feeling sad. It's what we do with it. We have human emotions, and how we react to those is really what makes all the difference. The sin is often how we react to a notion or to an urge or something like that. It's Dietrich von Hildebrand calls it giving sanction to those negative things. When we give sanction to them, when we say yes to them, that's the sin. When we look forward to them, maybe it's not so good. But sometimes we have those things and then we say no to them. And when we do that, there's no sin in that. That's virtue, in fact, maybe. So let's take a look at the 3 that we're going to cover in some detail. And the first one is gluttony. So we're going to start with the sins of the flesh. And it's about taking more than we need or is appropriate for whatever reason, and I want to get to root causes and talk about what's behind these. But in the first place, gluttony doesn't have to be about food, although that's very common. It can be about other things. It can be about having a flashier car than we need to. It can be about wearing clothes that have to be just perfect. It can be a matter of taste, that everything has to be done just so. And if it isn't perfect, then it bothers us. We're not getting as much pleasure as we really want out of it. So that's an aspect to gluttony. What we can talk about, though, is why do I say that that part of the cure, part of the counter virtue for gluttony is actually faith or trust in God? And the reason is because in gluttony, sometimes it's motivated by a fear of not having enough later. You know, human beings, our bodies have the ability to store fat. It's a way to store energy. So that if there's some point where we don't have enough food, that we're able to live off that. I mean, I could tell you from survival stuff, supposedly, you know, a lot of us could live for as much as a month, provided we had water, on what we've stored. So the body's an amazing thing. When we use it wrong, when we're gluttonous, we can end up carrying more than we need to. But it's the idea is that I'm afraid that I'm not going to have something later, and so I store up more. You know, I'm going to eat like crazy now. What is the saying? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may diet. You know, it's that kind of a thing. I'm going to get all that pleasure now, and because I don't know, I may not get pleasure tomorrow, so I'm going to get it now. And it's disordered. You know, that's not natural in the sense of a healthy natural, the way that God created us. So something to think about there. Okay, and then let's talk a little bit about sloth. Sloth, or acedia. You know, originally there were 8 capital sins as proposed by John Cassian, and Gregory the Great back in the 6th century reduced it down to 7 because we really like 7. And when he did that, I believe he took sadness, which was one of the 8, and combined it with sloth and made it that. Now, you know, some people will be offended and say, well, you know, sadness isn't a sin. And you're right. Sadness is just a feeling. But if you think about it, if you're really trying, if your aim is to become more human, if your aim is to grow and be stronger and more capable, then you can kind of understand that sloth and sadness are very much alike. You know, when you feel lazy, you know, take it the other way. When you're sad, you don't really feel like doing anything sometimes. I mean, okay, shopping for some people. But when we're sad, we don't move. We're sluggish. It's like, I just don't feel like doing anything. And on the other hand, when we are feeling sluggish, sometimes it makes us sad. You know, if you just don't get out and do something, if you don't accomplish something, you don't get those endorphins, and then it doesn't feel as good. So there's kind of a connection there, but don't think of these as occasions for guilt, because that isn't really helpful. Think of them as opportunities that are there, and then to find the opposite virtue and then go after it. So zeal, of course, is the opposite virtue in this case, or gift, or fruit. Sometimes I forget the gifts and the fruits, which ones are which. But anyway, so zeal is a good thing. One of the things I've found is that when I'm feeling lazy or sad, is I will go and find one thing that I can do well, even and preferably something small. So I have frequently a list of things I need to get done. What did I do the other day? There was something, I changed out the lights to low energy lights for savings in one of our rooms. It's something I've been saying I was going to do for a while. And I just went down to Home Depot. I got the stuff. I got it on sale super cheap, and then put them up there. And it didn't take that long. It was fairly easy work. But then once I did that, I felt more like doing other things. I felt better. I could turn them on and go, oh yeah, it's less energy now. It was like 300 watts before, and now it's down to really, really tiny wattage, like 40 watts. So it's really good. Okay, both spiritual and it's a physical sin. You know, I just talked about doing physical things, but also spiritually. You know, how often do we really get out and do spiritual reading like we should? I've taken the practice lately that I read the readings for the day almost every day at lunch. And, you know, you'd be surprised. Sometimes there'll be something interesting on some other social media, or I'll have something that I'm writing that I'll work on it then or something. But really, it just takes that zeal. It takes that desire to do it. Hopefully we're getting something out of it. But even if we don't, sometimes it's a way to give God an opportunity to reach us when we do that sort of thing. If we want to be found by God, the trick is to be in a place where we're more easily found. Strangely enough, God, in a sense, finds us more easily when we do spiritual reading. There's that, we're opening a door and he can come in if he wants to. So something to think about. All right. The other thing then would also be pride. And I kind of feel like pride is at the center or is at the root of all these. And I think it's an interesting exercise to go through each of the 7 deadly sins, or the 7 deadly attitudes might even be a good way to put it, and ask, how is pride involved in this? So we're going to spend a little bit of time on pride. So first of all, let's talk about pride and vanity. Vanity is about caring how we look. We might, a young woman that puts on, or an old woman that puts on makeup and really fixes herself up, will sometimes look in the mirror when she's not wearing makeup and feel very plain and say, well, I don't really look that good. But then when the makeup's on, it's like, oh, I look really good. So the makeup is how it looks to other people. But when she looks in the mirror without it, she knows that it's not the same. And that if that's okay, then it's just vanity. It's about the appearance, but there's the understanding that, okay, this isn't what it really is. This is just the thing I'm putting out so people think I'm really beautiful. The same thing with trying to look smart. Sometimes we'll say something to look smart. There are times I'll start to write something and then I'll actually erase it because I'll go, no, maybe I'm just showing off at this point. Sometimes we're just doing it for that. We want to look good. We want to look smart. We want to look attractive. We want to look kind. We want to look holy, whatever. And it's about appearance. That's vanity. If our vanity is offended, we're hurt, then we're sad. Oh, and then we go into sloth. But also, vanity also can cause us to be angry with others. It can cause envy. It kind of relates. So that's the reason why I say that pride and vanity can be underneath the other sins. If we don't feel that we look as good or that others don't esteem us very highly, we can end up having a problem with envy because of that. Oh, everybody thinks that so-and-so is so much smarter than they think I am. Tells you something about me. Or looks or something else. I go to the gym sometimes and I look at all these people, they're so fit, and I just think, I just can't get to where they are. And then I just laugh and go, you know what, it's because I don't work for it. And it doesn't matter to me, obviously, enough to go and work for it. Actually being really honest with ourselves, I'm getting ahead now, but being honest with ourselves really does help with all of these, but in particular, pride and vanity. Pride goes deeper. Pride is a matter of what we believe ourselves to be in our own judgment. And this is the key to pride. There's comparison in pride. I think I'm better than somebody else, or I'm, better, than some other standard perhaps. But the other thing is that with pride, it involves judgment. If I'm prideful, people think, oh, I'm going around thinking I'm better than everybody else. But that's not necessarily what pride is. Pride is about the judgment and the perception or the image we have of ourselves. So a person can be absolutely down on themselves because of pride. And we'll say, well, they obviously don't have pride. Look how they're always saying how stupid they are, how sad they are, or something like that, and how unfit, And the point is, it's the judgment that's the problem. So if you go around thinking that you're so much less than everybody else, there's the comparison. That's pride. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety and the roots of it. And I'm not here to cure your anxiety problems or whatever. And I know, my goodness, people are very sensitive right now that, this is only done with prescriptions and medicines and everything else. You're telling people to get off their drugs. I'm not saying anything about your medications at all. All I'm saying is there is an element of anxiety that you could look at, think about it a little bit, and maybe it will help a little. Maybe it will. And if it doesn't, no harm done. Just do what you're doing. If you need therapy, I don't care. Whatever you want to do. I'm just giving you some other ideas. My goodness, people are sensitive over this. So look, anxiety is really largely about fear. And fear is underneath all of these sins, and trust is the opposite. So when we judge ourselves, then we say, okay, I'm not as smart, pretty, strong, whatever it is. Successful. Oh my goodness, successful is horrible. And so I'm afraid other people will see that too. So then either I have to put on a big show. That's one way to do it. And then we perceive that as pride. Put on a big show. Look how smart I am. Look how successful I am. Oh, look at my car. Look at my clothes. Look at all the fancy jewelry. All that kind of stuff. It's all putting on a show. Conspicuous consumption, you can go look that one up, is all about putting on a show. It's letting other people know that we're wealthy and powerful or something, or loved or esteemed or whatever. But when somebody is on the other side and they're feeling really insecure, their judgment of themselves has been entirely negative, they'll avoid people. They'll avoid interactions. They don't want it to be seen, and so that's what they do. If you think about it with Adam and Eve in the garden, the story is after they sin, and in a sense, they have judged themselves then and said, oh, we did the thing that we weren't supposed to do. Factually true, but there's a judgment involved there. They're not taking into account anything about God and his mercy. And so what do? They hide. Where are you? Oh, I'm hiding over here. Not doing a very good job if you tell him, here I am, I'm hiding. We hid because we were naked. Nakedness has no protection. We're afraid of somebody else seeing our nakedness. We're afraid that somebody else will see that we fall short in the way we think we fall short. You've all known people. You've known people that thought they weren't attractive, but they were. It's one of those things people do. There's people that complain they're not smart. One of my children in particular would always say, I'm not the smart one. I'm really not that smart. So I went out and got an IQ test, one of these little cheap things. And everybody did fine. I didn't say he or she. But their IQ was fine. It was still, excellent. Sorry, did I just brag about my children? I know. But no, really, it's just they had made a judgment, and then they were afraid, and it made them afraid to reach out and to go forward and do things and try. Fear of failure is about fear of being discovered. Having the fear that somebody else will find out that you're not as smart as they think you are. But really, it's finding out that you're not that you don't want them to agree with your own assessment. That's really what it comes down to. Because we think, when we made a judgment on ourselves, we think that everybody else will somehow agree with that judgment. And that's just crazy. Because other people aren't always judging us in the first place. And if we really are sure everybody else is judging us, it means we're judging everybody else. If you want to really be free, don't worry about people's judgment, but stop judging others. Because when you don't judge others, then you realize, wait, maybe nobody else is judging me either. So what happens is when we believe that we fall short, then we either hide or we put on a show. But either way, we're hiding in some way. We're either hiding behind a mask, we're hiding behind some appearance that we fake, or we simply really literally hide. There's people that just don't even want to go out of their place. There's been some interesting articles in some countries. This is becoming a thing where people actually order food in, they work from home, and they will never set foot out of their apartment for years. It's a terrible, terrible thing. That's not the way people were meant to live. So the idea here is to have some trust in the mercy of God, certainly, but also to have a more realistic view of ourselves and understand that our judgments are not always good. As a matter of fact, our judgments are really very, very flawed. You would think, they say that you have an immediate experience of yourself. You know yourself directly. You don't have to learn about yourself from somebody else. But I don't know that that's really true. We get wrong ideas about ourselves. And we think that we're less than we are. And then sometimes we think that we have that, we think that, so then we do this thing and we puff ourselves all up and go, I'm really wonderful. But that's an illusion too. We simply are who we are. I remember that Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk, was talking about why he was in the in the monastery. And he was a novice master giving a talk to novices. And he said, why are we here? He says, we come here to live. You notice, it doesn't say, I come here to be happy. I don't come here to do a job. I come here to live. That's a beautiful thought. We're here to live, not to judge ourselves. Leave that to God. And I don't even know, I mean, you know, we look at God as the judge, but in reality, he loves us and has mercy and gives us life. And then we go do what we do. And really, the ultimate judgment is our life itself. It's self-evident at the end, I think. So the idea, though, is to, in the first place, stop judging ourselves. The other thing is, too, along with pride, we can sometimes see it in another interesting way. And that is that we do more than is required. Now, you know, it sounds lovely. You know, if Jesus said, if somebody makes you go a mile with them, go the extra mile. You know, if somebody asks for your cloak, give them your coat as well or something. You know, okay. And that's beautiful because that's meant to be done out of love. Ultimately, it's just meant to be done out of love. But when we're going farther and really letting things tear us up, sometimes it's because we want to prove to ourselves that we're better. We want to prove to ourselves, we're our own worst critic. We want to prove to ourselves that we're better, stronger, faster, smarter, more virtuous, you know. And when this goes into the church and becomes a thing about feeling holy without ever actually saying that, oh my goodness, that's the worst. That'll just destroy a person, because then it's trying to prove something to ourselves that cannot be proved. I can go take a test and find out if I know more about U.S. history than somebody else. You know, if I really want to know, I could go take that test, compare it to somebody else, and go, aha, I'm better than you. But I might not win, you know. But the idea is that in the spiritual matters, we can't know. St. Joan of Arc, and it was just her feast day today, when I'm recording this actually, which is Wednesday after the meeting. St. Joseph of Arc, when they asked her, you know, are you in the grace of God? You know, are you on good terms with God? And she said, if I'm not, may he put me in it. And if I am, may he keep me in it. There was a trick question to give them an excuse to burn her. They burned her even though she gave a great answer. This is all written down someplace, actually. But the idea is to not worry too much about it. Trust in the mercy of God. Go forward. When we do our work at work, we do schoolwork or anything else, we do what we can do. And we let the events unfold naturally. Now, something that came up recently since the talk that I thought was worth addressing was, somebody might say, you know what, I need the fear. The fear is what motivates me. Fear of failure makes me achieve, and it's a really big deal. Maybe you ought to rethink that. You know, that's not terribly productive. Fear is a negative thing on us. We weren't made to live in fear. Our bodies don't do well in fear. Our minds don't do well in fear. Fear doesn't help us sleep. Fear doesn't help us work effectively. It's a key thing for me at work. A lot of the work that I do, I have to put aside all fear. Because if I'm afraid, if I start thinking about my career and what do people think of me and whether or not my contract's going to get renewed, if I think about that, I'll make decisions differently. And I don't think those are good decisions for the company. Those decisions have to be made for what's good for my employer and the people around me and the people that report to me and things like that. That's the basis for the decisions, not whether or not I get to keep my job. That sounds really counterintuitive to some people, I'm sorry. But ultimately, our motivation should be love. So if we're going, and this is what I taught my children, I mean, not that all took it, but if you're going to go out and do school, love the knowledge, love the schoolmates if you're working on group projects, love to excel, just love the sheer joy of doing well. You know, seeing that A is a lovely thing. Don't worry about whether you're going to get into the right college. Don't worry about all the other stuff. At work, work for the joy of the work, because you're serving somebody, whatever the work is, you're serving somebody. And if you love them and you work that way, you'll achieve everything you need to achieve. And everybody else may not think you're the best in the world. They may not think you're the smartest, the most beautiful, or anything else. But God will know who you are. And you don't need to judge yourself. So anyway, that's about our time right there. We had a really great discussion. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. And please feel free to respond with questions on the site here or any way you want to do it. If you have other topics you want me to cover, I'm happy to do that anytime. Anyway, thank you very much. For those that don't know what this is about, the retreat and everything, it's a really great young adult retreat. through the parish. I very much recommend it if you're in St. Justin Martyr Parish. Otherwise, hopefully you got something out of it. I'm Ed Rushman. Take a look around at Whitestone Journal. I'm going to try and do some cool stuff with it soon. It's been around since 1996. It's had more than 3 million visitors. Kind of an interesting thing. If you do a search for 7 Deadly Sins on the web, you might actually see the site come up there in the searches. Thank you very much.